There's a Pandora's box of critical issues facing a 10 billion person world by the year 2050. These challenges present themselves across all five systems that generate human well-being. These systems are economic, environmental, food, health, and social. My name is Garrett Mastronardi. I've spent the past 2 years studying food security as part of the University of Florida's Challenge 2050 program, as well as independently as a journalist. Norman Borlaug, father of the Green Revolution, once said, "Without food, all other components of social justice are meaningless." 805 million people have insufficient food for active, healthy lives, according to the FAO 2014 report on global food security. 98% of these people are from developing countries, many of which are subsistence farmers. This video will examine the following 3 significant global challenges within the food system. The first challenge, imperfect access to resources. The second challenge, agronomic bankruptcy. The third challenge, short-sighted foreign intervention. It will also suggest potential solutions. Farming itself is a uniquely risky enterprise. Farmers are at the mercy of the weather, interest rates, currency prices, government policies, and fluctuations in the commodity markets. And farmers depend on these markets, in which they often have no leverage. These risks are further magnified by an imperfect access to resources. A major contributor to this problem is a lack of infrastructure. Markets cannot even gain traction in situations where the roads are so impassable that commerce may unpredictably cease at any moment. Where usable water is even accessible in some developing countries, irrigation canals are often dysfunctional. Many subsistence farmers also lack simple tools, such as shovels and plows. Any tools that suffer mechanical failure often become unusable because replacement parts are not available. But foreign aid for agricultural development, which includes funds for roads, irrigation canals, and other improvements that help smallholders grow more food, is still small compared to the amount of foreign aid going into developing world for other institutions. According to the UN, the share of development assistance devoted to agriculture dropped from 17% in the 1980s to just 5% by the eve of the food crisis that began in 2007. A lot of this aid, such as money for hospitals, roads, and other government institutions, tends to gravitate toward urban centers. These are built according to the interests of investors or corrupt government officials, and thus benefit primarily the elite. Now, it is my belief that soil is the world's most vital asset. If you treat it right, erosion will not claim it. Soil is like an oil well that never runs dry. Soil fertility has perhaps the single largest impact on production capacity, which makes it the most important tool we have to feed a fast-growing world. But agronomic bankruptcy, damaging soil practices that lead to soil infertility, eventually kills the soil. Land degradation is a widespread form of agronomic bankruptcy. The rate of deforestation is often highest in the world's hungriest countries. According to the FAO, land degradation is increasing in severity and extent in many parts of the world, with more than 20% of all cultivated areas, 30% of forests, and 10% of grasslands undergoing degradation. In some communities in developing countries, locals harvest trees for coal as an alternative to agriculture. More than 1.5 billion people depend directly on land that is being degraded. The Mayans, the Aztecs, the Vikings, and the Easter Islanders all devastated their agricultural productivity by failing to protect and nourish their soils. But in truth, we do not have accurate mechanisms or data to represent the true cost of treating land badly. Soil also suffers from monoculture practices, a lack of biodiversity. 20 species make up 90% of the world's diet. In developing countries, subsistence farmers typically select crop species based upon tradition, not research. They also grow what feeds the most people, and there can be a tendency to stick too long with a farming approach that does not work simply because a farmer has built up a reputation. Some African farmers, for example, have been handing down the same seeds for decades, even as the weather, pests, and diseases have changed. It's little wonder that Africa's grain yields are a quarter of the world's average. Soil itself is a complicated ecosystem, home to millions of diverse microbial organisms. Therefore, different regions have different soil profiles that farmers must accommodate in order to yield crops. There may even be different soil types present on a single farm in a single region. And the best soil for planting is soft and crumbly loam, a combination of sand, silt, and clay with a surface rich in organic matter, which includes decayed plant materials as well as other nutrients. The best soil has structural integrity, or tilth, neither so sticky with clay that roots cannot penetrate it, nor so sandy that it cannot hold nutrients and moisture. But these different soil profiles result in the over-fertilization of many areas. The Wall Street Journal recently published an article explaining how India's wheat yields increased for many years, but now as much as half of the country's soil is degraded from over-fertilizing. Proper fertilization is subject to many variables, including slope, drainage, soil compaction, pH levels, and available nutrients. The overuse of nitrogen in some areas has polluted water tables and degraded soils, causing yields to fall. These farmers' nitrogen approach is like releasing expensive waste back into their own fresh water supplies. Another problem is that nitrogen fertilizer supercharges the growth of various crops but does not replenish organic matter or replace other essential nutrients needed for productive soil. Merely fertilizing is like giving a sick man oxygen and caffeine but not food. You can speed up his metabolism, make him more alert, maybe more energetic for a short time, but at some point he will collapse from the lack of calories needed to retain body mass and fuel the brain and other basic functions. Short-sighted forward interventions such as occasional or emergency NGO food aid also damages yields. Inconsistent projects such as these garner lackluster support at best from the local communities because the people know that the relief is only temporary. And without the support of these locals, there can be no lasting change. And what's worse is the precedent that sets. In many parts of Africa, for example, the act of giving opens the door to expectations. And once bags of food aid or other forms of assistance arrive, many African people in difficult situations adjust their views and believe it is the new way they will eat. It is their cultural response to new resources coming to their territory. If you start feeding me, I will let you keep feeding me. And if you keep feeding me and stop, I will demand to know why. That is the attitude that they are adopting, but setting these expectations are not the only negative effects. NGOs also should not give away seed because the competition discourages local seed companies from taking root. When NGOs add supply to the local markets, they create distortions that devastate local prices while also having an unintended consequence of discouraging farmers from growing that crop in the future. Additionally, NGO food aid that falls into the wrong hands is sometimes monetized or taken to market, often by corrupt officials. This means that food grown and shipped specifically for the purpose of feeding the poorest people can end up making breakfast muffins in fancy urban hotels. The solutions then lie in agricultural development aid, because these benefits flow directly to a large group of needy people. Assistance in the form of training, irrigation, infrastructure, or improved seed development, for example, is of little use to thieves or corrupt officials. The key to sustainable change is value chain development. This involves an entire value chain intervention. You cannot just come in and build infrastructure, especially in areas of rural poverty. You have to find local entrepreneurs with good ideas and help them develop the ability to grow their business and access markets. For example, you might use a microcredit system to allow farmers to purchase simple equipment that is easy to operate and requires few inputs, such as fertilizer or fuel. As farmers become more prosperous, they can then pay up and trade up for more complex tools. Basically, value chains are sustainable agricultural ecosystems where individuals and businesses have an incentive to work together to create a strong economic sector. The more a community owns an outcome, and the more comprehensive the strategy, the more likely it is to succeed in improving livelihoods. Educating subsistence farmers in conservation farming methods is also a key component to this solution. These methods use cover crops, which are weed-like plants that increase organic matter in the soil and help hold it in place in rain and wind. They also collect nitrogen gas from the air and store it in their roots. This reduces the amount of fertilizer farmers need to apply. Using a technique known as intercropping, farmers plant cover crops in between rows of their staple crops, like corn. No-till farming works together with intercropping by taking advantage of the plant residues left behind after harvest. The leftover vegetation decomposes and helps soil retain moisture. It eventually becomes mulch that serves as a natural fertilizer, which also increases water available to crops during droughts. This mulch retards weed growth by not allowing sunlight to reach the weed seeds. It also keeps soil temperatures cooler, supporting a larger number of beneficial insects that feed on pests. Finally, no-till reduces labor that goes into crop preparation and planting, and it allows farmers to put seeds directly into the soil with minimal displacement. These practices have been proven to work, with no example better than the Brazilian Cerrado, where higher year-round temperatures mean that organic matter decays so quickly on the surface that it does not easily nourish the soil structure, which tends to be either sandy or high in clay content. But here, using 80% no-till practices, soil erosion has been reduced by about 75% since the practices were adopted. Within the last 20 years, the undernourished portion of Brazil's population has been halved. The underweight portion of the population of children under 5 is 1/3 what it was 20 years ago. In developing countries, the best way to support agribusiness is through enlightened capitalism, a demand-based approach to philanthropy that uses charitable dollars to catalyze private sector markets. The ultimate goal of this form of social value investing is to transform the beneficiaries into shareholders. For example, the World Food Programme's Purchase for Progress initiative purchases aid locally from farmers who are themselves struggling. This satisfies an immediate need and creates a strong, stable buyer for local crops that also creates an incentive for smallholder farmers to learn to farm better and more efficiently. Emergency interventions are just temporary painkillers, so we must pay attention to consistent global awareness and advocacy. Howard Buffett, son of Warren Buffett and author of the book 40 Chances, said it best. You cannot play the drums with one hand. You cannot just treat the symptoms and expect the problem to go away. The only way to revolutionize agriculture is through a constant, global exchange of ideas and actions. All successful initiatives must revolve around education, because by facilitating agricultural development, we can help a large group of needy people sustain active and healthy lives. If the goal is social justice, I believe food security is the first step.